The New South Wales government has announced a radical overhaul of planning laws.
We have to accommodate 1 million people within the next 20 to 25 years. You accept that?
And you don't have to do that by destroying the advantages this city has.
Planning laws could destroy our streets and wipe out backyards.
The battle cry of "not in my backyard" is about to spark an urban war across Sydney suburbs.
These plans are not addressing a housing crisis.
They are bypassing the will of the people.
The New South Wales government's explosive rezoning plans are set to demolish the status quo. New South Wales is in the grip of a housing affordability crisis that's pricing many Sydney-siders and regional residents out of the market. That's why the New South Wales government has announced bold new planning reforms that could transform the landscape of housing across the state for generations to come. At the heart of these controversial changes are two major pillars. Pillar 1, policies to boost diverse and well-located homes through rezoning that allows for more low-rise and medium-density housing. And Pillar 2, a transport-oriented development program focused on permitting higher density around 39 major transport hubs around New South Wales. The government sees these moves as a critical solution to the housing supply shortage, but not everyone is on board with the prospect of changing neighbourhood character and increased development density. And while the New South Wales government's planning reforms are certainly ambitious in scope, just how effective will they be in solving the housing crisis? That's what we'll dive into in this video, and while I created this for my home of Sydney and the state of New South Wales, the takeaways still apply to other Australian states and regions facing similar challenges. In my previous video, I went through 8 factors explaining why we ended up with an affordability crisis in the first place, looking deeply at drivers of demand and supply. These drivers included low interest rates, immigration, shortages of well-located land, and rising construction costs, to name a few. These problems have been bubbling away for such a long time that the federal government, in conjunction with the states, territories, and local governments, released the National Housing Accord in November 2022 and agreed in August 2023 to build 1.2 million new well-located homes over 5 years from mid-2024. Each state received a mandate, with New South Wales signing up to build 377,000 homes, or roughly 75,000 homes a year, and 31% of the overall national allocation. However, here's the conundrum. Based on the recent completions of 48,000 homes in 2022 and 44,000 approvals in 2023, New South Wales is nowhere near where it needs to be to hit 75,000 homes per year, with Victoria building 59,000 dwellings over the same 2022 period, despite having a smaller population. As a result of these housing shortages, housing affordability in New South Wales is easily the most severe in the country. In the 1980s, the average Sydney house cost $78,000, or about 5 times the average wage. Now, the typical house is 17 times more expensive and 14 times the average income. Rents have also gone up significantly, increasing 16.4% over the last 3 years, according to SQM research at the time of recording this video. And alarmingly, between 2016 and 2021, for every 30 to 40-year-old that came to live in Sydney, 2 left, or an outflow of 7,000 young people per year. These conditions have led the New South Wales Productivity Commissioner, Peter Achterstradt, to protest that eventually, Sydney will become a city with no grandchildren if we don't act soon.
We'll be in a situation where there'll be a dearth of talent between the 30 and 40-year-olds, but also these people leaving, there'll be a lack of grandchildren.
So, if such drastic change is needed, what does the New South Wales government have in store? Given the housing mess and the need to catch up quickly, there was no way Premier Chris Minns and Planning Minister Paul Scully could think small. Off the back of 2 key papers last year, building more homes where people want to live and building more homes where infrastructure costs less, they did not disappoint, releasing a series of reforms which planning experts have described as once in a generation. And more recently, a third paper has been released this year, What We Gain by Building More Homes in the Right Places. And don't worry, I've read all 145 pages, so you don't have to. Now, Sydney has historically been a city with many diverse housing types, with many of the city's inner suburbs containing a mix of detached houses, terraces, small apartment blocks, and manor homes. But in recent times, our beautiful city lost its way, meeting new housing demand with mostly urban sprawl, building new homes in new greenfield locations in southwest Sydney, northwest Sydney, western Sydney, and in the regions. Or higher density, such as in Chatswood, Epping, St Leonards, Macquarie Park, Rhodes, Wentworth Point, Walleye Creek, Hurstville, Zetland, and Waterloo. So, Sydney-siders have had very little choice, having to either pick between a high-rise apartment or a detached home on the fringes of Sydney, because there hasn't been much of it in between, with many commentators describing this as Sydney's missing middle. As another point of frustration, New South Wales planning found that while many areas of Sydney are zoned R2 for low density and R3 for medium density, many local councils block denser forms of housing. For example, terraces and 1 to 2 story unit blocks are only allowed in R2 zoning in 2 out of 32 local environmental plans. This is despite 77% of the available land being zoned R2, showing that not all councils are willing to share the housing load and highlighting the tension between state and local governments in addressing the housing crisis. This is where the diverse and well-located housing reforms come in. And unfortunately, for local governments, the state of New South Wales holds a powerful trump card. The core of the reforms revolves around rezoning areas near transport and amenities across New South Wales' 6 cities region, from Newcastle to Wollongong and out to Western Sydney's Bradford City. Within 800 metres walking distance of train stations, metro stops, light rail stations, and major town centres designated as well-located precincts, the changes are twofold. First, on residentially zoned R3 land, the government will now require councils to permit medium-density residential flat buildings and shop-top houses. Closer to the transport hubs, within 0 to 400 metres, those can go up to 21 metres or 6 stories, and from 400 to 800 metres, they'll max out at 16 metres or 4 to 5 stories. Second, more missing middle low-rise housing like terraces, townhouses, and manor homes will be allowed on R2 zoned land within that 800 metre radius, which today only permits low-density detached housing. And in a broader change across the 6 cities region, duplexes and dual occupancies must also be approved on all R2 land with a minimum lot size of 450 square metres regardless of proximity to train and metro stations. The controversial part of these rezoning reforms, though, is that the government is implementing these zoning changes by updating state planning laws known as the State Environmental Planning Policy, or SEP for short, that override local council objections by using non-refusal standards. Councils will have no choice but to follow the new rules, especially where the developments meet the standards of the Apartment Design Guide, which will also be due for an update this year, and other preset development criteria. In terms of when you can expect these changes to come into effect, the reforms were announced last year November, with a consultation process held between the 15th of December 2023 and the 23rd of February 2024. At the time of this recording, the New South Wales Government is reviewing all feedback received, with plans to make updates to the SEP mid-late this year. Now, while those zoning changes could provide 112,000 new homes by 2029, the government isn't stopping there. They have an even bolder play: the Transport Oriented Development Program, or TOD for short. As the name suggests, transport-oriented development is a planning philosophy that promotes building around key transport infrastructure to promote public transport usage, in turn making that transport more cost-effective to deliver and supporting more density. The second major component identifies 39 transit hubs across Sydney to become high-density housing precincts through aggressive upzoning. It's a two-part plan. Part 1 fast-tracks 8 accelerated zones around stations like Bankstown, Macquarie Park, and the new Crow's Nest metro stop. Any development over $60 million within 1,200 metres of these stations can access an express state-significant development approval pathway, with the government committing to green lighting projects within just 90 days, potentially bypassing years of red tape. The rezonings for these 8 accelerated precincts will be complete by November 2024, with developers having until 2027 to start construction under this accelerated process. It's expected to create around 47,800 new homes in these areas over the next 15 years. Part 2 is rezoning another 31 transit precincts like Roseville and Lindfield in Sydney's north and Rockdale and Cogra in Sydney's south to allow apartments up to 21 metres or 6 stories tall within 400 metres of the stations. Now, if this sounds similar to the diverse and well-located homes policy, that's because it is. However, where the TOD is more generous or permissive, which is expected to be, these rules will override any diverse, well-located housing policy. Part 2 is projected to add 138,000 new homes over the next 15 years, and they're rolling these reforms out from April 2024. So in total, the Transport-Oriented Development Program aims to create over 185,000 new homes by leveraging Sydney's existing rail and metro infrastructure to enable high-density living around major transport corridors. Importantly, both programs encourage affordable housing with 15% and 2% allocations respectively, and generous floor space ratio grants to developers who comply, in an effort to keep essential jobs such as nurses, teachers, and emergency workers close to communities and near critical transport infrastructure. Now, with such a massive rezoning and push for higher density development across Sydney, the government's planning reforms have sparked an intense debate. Are they a long overdue solution to finally make housing affordable again? Or an overreach that will destroy Sydney's livability, environment, and neighbourhood character? And what does this all mean for you? Are you finding it hard to buy a home or even rent in the Sydney market and welcome these changes? Or are you an existing homeowner screaming out, "No way, not in my backyard"? In my assessment, the pros and cons of the reforms centre on 4 key criticisms. The first criticism is, do these reforms really address the housing shortage? There's no doubt that we are in a pickle and something urgently needs to be done. Housing groups are screaming out for this, as are younger Australians and lower income households, believing the reforms are needed to rapidly address the housing shortage. This is also really important because expensive housing works like a regressive tax, where lower income households pay a greater proportion of their incomes towards housing, whether in rent or mortgage repayments. In fact, the New South Wales Productivity Commission found that a 10% increase in supply leads to a 25% decrease in housing costs, which is like giving a pay bump to all Sydneysiders, but especially lower income earners. By contrast, NIMBY councils and their homeowners are saying that the reforms are too rushed and a blanket one-size-fits-all approach will not work.
Fearing it will change the feeling of a suburb for those who already live there.
Without the proper investment of infrastructure, it's not going to be a good experience for anyone who lives here.
Different councils have different social, economic, heritage, and environmental considerations, and you simply can't draw concentric circles around train stations and slate those areas for property development. The second criticism asks, are the reforms pro-choice or anti-choice? Reform advocates argue it's a myth that all Australians want a detached home and that many households are willing to give up space to live where they want to be closer to jobs, public transport, their families, and good amenities such as playgrounds, parks, and beaches. Furthermore, people should be given more choices for different types of dwellings as they transition through life, whether it be families upsizing or retirees downsizing, and everything in between. Single-person households are actually the fastest growing segment of housing demand, and Sydney's housing stock is not catering well for this. Critics, on the other hand, say the reforms give them no choice in shaping the future of where they live. The use of non-refusal standards and state development pathways to bypass local councils has been viewed as totalitarian and undemocratic. For example, existing plans to support more housing by Lane Cove, Hornsby and Willoughby councils have been effectively scrapped, with these LGAs saying they have already taken on a disproportionate load to address the housing crisis.
The dual occupancy, what that will create is 48,000 new homes just in the Fairfield LGA. Put in place Blacktown, Fairfield, Liverpool, Camden, and all the suburbs out here, Penrith. It's the end of the family home, Laura. Do you understand?
LGAs are instead arguing they should be given balanced targets factoring in past efforts and the freedom to independently meet these targets. The third question is, what's the real financial cost? Another finding by the New South Wales Productivity Commission is that it costs up to $75,000 more per dwelling to extend new infrastructure to the fringes of Sydney rather than build homes around existing infrastructure. Ultimately, infill development is a much better use of taxpayer dollars because established infrastructure such as train stations, roads, and other public facilities can be upgraded, repurposed, or are even underutilised in the first place. In fact, the New South Wales government has already budgeted $520 million to support such upgrades to the 8 Todd accelerated precincts in preparation for this. NIMBYs, however, are saying this is not enough and not going to the right areas. They argue that Sydney will become a developer's playground with uncontrolled overdevelopment, leading to further traffic congestion, packed trains, overcrowded schools and hospitals, and unmanageable pressure on local sewage and wastewater infrastructure. Finally, the fourth criticism looks at what are the other economic and environmental gains. Reform advocates argue that a denser, more commutable city is not only more productive, but is also more innovative, inclusive, and equal. Clearly, if you're stuck in traffic or on the train all day, you're less likely to be able to get your work done, and it's usually lower income households that live further away. An example quoted is that the proposed metro station at 5 Dock is expected to bring 45% of Sydney's jobs within a 30-minute commute, whereas today it's estimated that only 3% of jobs can be accessed by 5 Dock residents within a 30-minute commute. Also, supporters argue that there will be positive environmental impacts from more walking, increased public transport usage, and fewer cars on the road. And building houses in existing areas with more temperate climates will also reduce the electricity needed to cool and heat Sydney homes. However, councils are not convinced. The productivity arguments are viewed as generic and unrealistic, for example, by comparing Sydney to London when evaluating the benefits of density. Greener LGAs such as Ku-ring-gai and Hornsby believe that there will be a significant loss of tree canopy, wildlife extinction, and adverse impacts such as overshadowing, lack of privacy, and loss of scenic views and streetscape. Also, houses may end up being developed in fire-prone and flood-susceptible areas, leading to even more costs and housing issues down the track. So, there's definitely a lot going on here, But on the balance, are the planning reforms good or bad for Sydney and the state of New South Wales? In my own line of work as a mortgage broker, I deal with clients from all walks of life, helping them buy homes, and my personal evaluation is that our cities need this. Sadly, the dream of owning a home is running away, and even households on a good income are struggling to buy in Sydney. We are just not hitting our targets of supplying enough homes, especially to the households that need them the most. But this isn't only about blindly meeting the National Housing Accord. It's about staving off the sinister effects of inequality and preserving the quality of life in our great city, not only for current residents, but also for our children and grandchildren. Sydney is one of the least dense cities in the world, and if we leave it to councils alone, it'll simply be too slow. Not all councils are sharing the load equally, and drastic reforms are needed to accelerate the pace of change. So, borrowing from the words of New South Wales Productivity Commissioner Peter Arkestrat, a balanced view is needed, keeping in mind the welfare of future generations to ensure density is done well. If we can manage this transition, I'm confident that Sydney will continue to be a great global city that maintains its vibrancy, beauty, and amazing quality of life. And as we consider the broader implications of these reforms, my perspective as an experienced mortgage broker, especially one attuned to Sydney's evolving market, can provide you with the edge you need. For ongoing updates and expert insights into how these changes could affect your property goals, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.